Welcome to the Numbers Game. I'm Jason. I'm joined by Nick and Marty for another exciting episode. How are we going, guys?
Going well, Jace. Excited about numbers. I was inspired by your last tax effective productivity ATO podcast that we did, that I've brought in a little bit of an investment property flavour into this one to just help the masses get ahead. Nick, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. And it's not easy out there, particularly for the investment property holders. So I'm really glad you brought this to the table, because this is something you and I have been talking about for a few weeks now. And every time we talk about it, we're just baffled at what is going on for investors and landlords. When we're talking investors, we're mainly talking landlords today. And I think it's going to have a significant impact on what happens with supply levels in the property market over the next few months. So looking forward to hearing you unpack that. How are you, Jace? Looking good? Shorter haircut? Looks a bit shorter. Is it shorter?
Yeah, I was getting a little bit dishevelled a few eps ago. I missed one of my haircut appointments and it just grew out and I started to look like a bit of a homeless bum, and the greys are coming through. It's all happening, Nick, as we get older and we move into new financial years, and the stresses of, especially all the stuff I shared about being an accountant, the things we have to do. But no, mate, all good. Fresh cuts, feeling good. It's, just exciting times. And look, I agree, this episode that we got coming up, talking about investment property owners, rates, and the different cash flow things. It's very timely. Recently got a rent rise by our landlord, where Case and I are in South Yarra at the moment. And after 3 years of not paying a dollar more than what we were paying when we moved in during COVID, absolutely felt validated and like it was the right thing to do by the landlord. And, again, having a bit of a different lens on it to go, what's happening on that person's end, meant that it was an easy pill to swallow for us. But before we crack in, this episode brought to us by the great people at Innovate, all things financial planning, mortgage broking, asset finance, and commercial lending. So if any of those things pop into your mind and go, actually, I need some of that, Innovate's the team to go to, inovayt.com.au. Get in touch with the team and they'll be more than happy to help you in any of those areas. Marty, talk us through what is going on in the investor market with rental properties and interest rates.
Yeah, I think people are genuinely concerned that don't have an investment property, just with the cost of living going up. And we've had 12 rate increases in 13 months. And I was reading an article just over the weekend in regards to that. First of all, there was an economist saying that we could actually get a cash rate of 4.85, given that the job numbers are up again and wage increases have continued to increase. So unemployment is still at an all-time low at 3.7%. They want that at 4.5. And, and it's like, then when I went to a meeting, there was a chief economist. I was at a seminar last Thursday night, Dr. Andrew Wilson, and he was really good. He thinks that there was maybe only one more rate rise in the tank, just because we're starting to see some pressure in regards to retail sales. So it's interesting, because really good intellectual people are kind of getting surprised in this type of market. And the story seems to change from day to day to week. But for investors, there's quite a substantial difference in regards to costings and cash flows when you put that on top of their personal expenses and their personal mortgages as well. So we're going to unpack that. The article that I was reading is the demand for holiday rentals in places like Byron Bay and also the Sunshine Coast, interestingly enough, have really slumped. So that says to me that discretionary spending is not being utilised as much for travel, and there's more vacancies in those types of properties at the moment, and probably at the least worst time in regards to really looking at the numbers. It's interesting with Airbnbs and fully tenanted investments. Like sometimes they say you can get a 14% return on an Airbnb, whereas you might get only 4.5%, 5% on a long-term tenancy. But really, you got to think of the numbers overall. Like there's vacancy rates that are a lot higher, sometimes 30 to 40%. You got furniture costs as well. The cost to run the Airbnb is quite significant in regards to cleaning fees and various other fees. So by the time you strip that all out, it can be somewhere around that 7 to 8% mark. And I think people forget about that. And then, there's a lot more headaches in trying to run those things as well. So just even from a investment, it's harder sometimes to lend against the Airbnbs because the banks like consistency of having a long-term tenant in. So you almost have to run it like a business and have 1 year's of full traction in the Airbnb.
Just to jump in there, Marty, with the difference with short term as well, one of the things that often is not or is disregarded or not paid attention to is every time the owner of that property jumps in and uses their short-term rental, it adds a whole different batch of paperwork, a whole bunch of accounting, a whole bunch of lodging your tax return differently and pro-ratering non-deductible deductions that then have to go towards the CGT schedule one day in the future when you sell that property. So beyond renting long-term being more simplified from a reporting to the ATO point of view, your short-term rentals have huge amounts of kind of extra paperwork and headaches from an ATO and compliance point of view as well. So, definitely something to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, and I think ultimately we got to look at what investors are going through here, and they're saying even from that economist viewpoint, property's gone up over the last 2 months, and the expectation is that property will rise over the next 12 months as well. And it's not necessarily just from a lack of supply. The economic numbers in big business is still reasonably sharp. Unemployment is still low. And like I said before, pay increases are still occurring. And they're putting that towards, the reason that everyone needs a roof over their head, as well as high migration numbers, particularly into Melbourne and Sydney as well. And people need homes. And the construction industry is virtually non-existent at the moment just because of, I guess, cost to build and real pressures being felt on low-margin businesses in the construction game. So that's all supporting higher property prices, and we see it in the business here at Innovate. We've got amazing activity and a high percentage of people getting approved in principle to make a move on their property as well. So we're seeing like high interest in securing a property, but it's just becomes an affordability issue. And like I've talked about previously, if you've got a combined income of $180,000, 2 years ago back in July, you would have been able to borrow about 1.17 mil on that income, and now you can borrow around about 802,000. So it's not that people don't want to borrow and they don't want to buy; it's just at how much and where. So that becomes an interesting dynamic as well. So again, the investor market is potentially where it's at because this is what the investors are actually going through on a cash flow basis. And I'll run some numbers. If you were buying for $750,000 on an investment and you're renting it out for $600 a week 2 years ago, your annual rent would have been $31,200. And your interest rate would have been around about 2.4% at that time. So if you borrowed 90%, 600,000 loan, your interest expense on interest only would have only been 14,400 per annum. And then if you took out a loan to cover the difference to buy at 100% plus the stamps, add that in, you'd have another 4,800 interest expense. And then around about 16% expense on your rental return for costs such as agents, property managers, insurances, rates, various things like that. So that comes out at 4,992. So you would be in a positive cash flow position of $7,008. So that's pretty good. I mean, investments running a business, right? So to have that type of return is fantastic, and you've got some additional non-paper deductions that you can do on depreciating assets and capital works. So that's a pretty good scenario. But if I fast forward to 2 years later, now in 2023, on that same premise, yes, rents have gone up slightly. So let's say rents have gone up from $600 a week to $700 a week. That gets you $36,400. But now your interest expense on that $600,000 is at 6.4% interest. So that's $38,400 that you're paying in interest. Now, the additional 200 you borrowed, so to cover the 100% purchase, 6.4% as well, that's $12,800. And now you've also got your holding costs have gone up now with land tax increases in Victoria in particular, and insurance is going up substantially, and just general costs and maintenance going up. So that's now at 18% at $6,552, and I might even be a little bit conservative on that. So now your cash flow position is that you're at a loss of $21,352 per annum. So that's a significant turnaround. That's nearly a 30 grand turnaround in regards to your cash flow position. So if you've got already pressures on the home loan side and your expenses of living, and then add to this another turnaround in cash flow on the investment property, you can see where that pressure starts to come into the market. And look, don't get me wrong, property is always the hero of the story in Australia. And my advice would be, instead of being reactive and just going, we're going to sell, pump it back into the mortgage, do anything, you need to create a 12 to 18 month plan to how you're going to navigate this and work with a professional to refinance, see what advantages you can get back coming to you, because this too shall pass. It just might not pass for 18 months, so you need to be able to cope with it. And another interesting statistic was 31.6% of all listings in May were from investors. So that says to me, now there's a number of things, there's new benefits that tenants have that weren't there before. There's a lot of things, but once money starts actually coming out of your pocket, it starts to burn. And that's when people, make different decisions. So I would encourage a 12 to 18 month plan, review your circumstances, work out how you're going to navigate through to that next windfall when rates ultimately start coming down, which the economists were talking about won't happen now till probably about May of next year. So there's a little bit to ride out here, and circumstances can change, as we've seen in regards to reporting these types of things actually happening. So just making sure you've got a good plan of attack and know your numbers and act accordingly based around those numbers. And if you need to liquidate because you need to liquidate, then that's absolutely fair. But you want to be certain that you've looked through those numbers before you just reactively do that. And on the flip side, first home buyers, investment properties are generally a little bit lower than the person's own home, right, when they purchase. So they're in that affordability buffer where people are looking to buy. So you've still got a lot of excitement in those areas to buy. So you'll still get a good price on those investments if you are listing and selling in the current market as well before the silly season hits in spring and everyone dumps their properties on the market again. So again, you've got options as investors. That's why it's really important you think through it. Anything to add there?
Mate, that's just incredible numbers. And the reality is that investors cannot afford to hold properties anymore. And that is what's going to drive the listings coming into this spring. So you've just rattled off numbers then, which showed someone is now $21,000 a year in negative cash flow to hold a property. You worked on $600 a week on a $750,000 property. Now, in Victoria, you're averaging 3 to 3.5% in yield. So that's actually only about $500 a week. So that's $100 a week worse off. So let's say now they're $26,000 a year down. Most people are probably paying another $1,000 a month on their mortgage if they've got a bit of debt. So there's $12,000. So all of a sudden we're at $38,000 a year that people are worse off before you factor in increase petrol, increase fuel cost, energy, the normal inflation, insurances outside of the property, such as car insurance, home and contents. My home and contents went up 30% this year, income protection. So, hypothetically, someone's $40,000, you combine all that together, if they've got an investment property and a mortgage, they could be $40,000 worse off. Now, Jace, you'd know the stats on this, but I assume those people are in a 25% tax rate. They've probably got to earn 60,000 to earn 40. So the reality is they just can't hold these properties. And why, if you're struggling in so many areas cash flow wise, what are you going to do? You're going to get rid of the investment. And to your point, Marty, most people have made money on these places over the last 5 to 10 years. So they're cashing in, they're getting rid of them. Not only does it help the cash flow burden, but it also probably helps them put a bit of money in the bank to offset any risks that might be ahead of them. So, I think it's sounding probably a little bit animated because I just get really frustrated when you're hearing all this stuff about landlords. Landlords are upping rents and rents are skyrocketing. Rents are not even, but they're not even putting a dent in the cash flow. That's the reality. I can speak firsthand. I had a property. We just increased the rent by $30 a week. Now the interest on that place has doubled, and the rent's gone up $30 a week in the last 3 years. So I just hope people understand that landlords aren't necessarily out there, cashing, throwing dollar bills everywhere and just increasing rents because they can. The reality is they have to, and the other sad reality is those people are now, a lot of them are going to be forced to sell, and where it's really sad is people that have bought in the last sort of 2 to 3 years who are reasonably highly geared on the property, so holding quite a bit of debt. They probably haven't made a lot of money in capital growth. They've definitely paid 5% in stamp duty to get in. They're definitely going to pay somewhere between 1.5% to 2.5% to an agent to sell it. So a lot of these people that hold these properties are going to walk away with nothing for their efforts the last 2 or 3 years. So it's I think it's really bad. And some of these people own 2 or 3 properties.
Yeah, and that's where it just compounds. So all of a sudden, someone might have a 70 grand expense per annum, and it's just it's crazy stuff. And I'm talking to people on good incomes that just have one investment property, and they're going, you know what, I feel like I'm doing okay, but I'm kind of struggling at the moment in regards to even holding on to this investment. And that's magnified with 3 or 4 and depending on where they are in the investment cycle, they might, there's a lot of people out there that would have low debt as well on good capital that they've earned over the years. But this is where it comes back to where you have to treat your investments like a business. And people go, oh, I've got a quality tenant, I don't want to up the rent. Well, land tax is kicking in as well as all these other costs. You need to negotiate with your property manager and have discussions around increasing that rent substantially, not because you want to do that to someone. It's more so from a business perspective, it demands that. And you've also got to look at what you can save in regards to your finance as well. You've got to turn the game. It might not be back in your favour, but you've got to set yourself up for when the circumstances change and they do get back in your favour, so you can get that 6%, 7% capital growth year on year. But at the moment, if you're making that significant loss, you've got to get that capital growth just to get something back on your position. It feels like you're at a loss, and that's how people are genuinely feeling on the ground as investors at the moment.
And to be honest, I've never had more conversations in my career and in my life with people who are selling their investment properties right now because of exactly what we're talking about today. The ability for mum and dad investor who have worked their ass off to buy a property to try and better themselves in life. That's the landlord that a lot of tenants are complaining about, going, oh, how dare they put my rent up? But they're just a couple. They're investors trying to get ahead in life by having the Australian dream of buying an investment property, and that example, Marty, from $7,000 positive cash flow to negative 21,000, a $28,000 swing in one property, and that's not like that person's gone and bought the multi-million-dollar mansion. That's a $750,000 bricks and mortar suburban home that some family with a kid going to the primary school down the road is living in.
Well, that's on top of the increases in their mortgage
correct.
costs and living expense. Like living expenses gone up 17% in the last couple of years, and I think that's even conservative. That steak that used to be $35, I'm sure is sitting up around $58 at the moment. You can't go to the shops without a bag of groceries costing you $80, $90. I mean, it's just there's a lot of, it's just magnified with the investment. And of course, people will do this, will do the safe thing and offload the investment before they'll ever, offload their own home.
And unfortunately, a lot of those conversations are coming to me after the client has decided to sell. Like they haven't looked at increasing their rent, reducing some costs elsewhere. They've had that panic attack and gone, they've got a call from a real estate agent who's just doing their job and gone, hey, would you like to list your property? I reckon I can get this much for it. And they've gone, you know what? Take the stress away from me, get rid of the property. But then what's happening is they're calling their accountant as an afterthought, going, oh, the property's sold now. I better find out how much tax I've got to put aside. And with
Correct.
some of those clients then get pushed up into the 37% tax bracket. And yes, they've got their CG discount and whatnot, but all of a sudden when you're handing over another 20, 30, 40, $50,000 to the ATO at tax time out of what little you might have had left over from the gain on the property, it's some of them then go, oh, maybe I should have held on to the property. Maybe I could have wrote it out. So I think, the message I've got there is if you haven't put your rents up in the last couple of years, consider that first. If you haven't spoken to a broker about what's possible to do with your repayments and refinancing, talk to them as well. Like, the decision to sell and list your property needs to happen after a few of these conversations, and including getting your accountant involved so you can at least know the full picture of the decision to sell or hold and go from there.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jace, because it just talking about the planning side of things and making sure you have all of the pieces of information that you need. We had one particular couple. We actually saved them $90,000 in capital gains tax. So this particular couple had a property that they bought quite some time ago. So the gain was huge. Good for them. They bought it a long time ago, so they've done the hard yards. They were self-employed, so they hadn't been putting a lot of money into super. So winding back their super contributions and bringing the last 5 years forward, I think they could put around $220,000 or $230,000 of that profit or of that sale money into super. So what was looking like $110,000 capital gain tax bill came down to $20,000 just by contributing that money into super. This particular couple weren't far from retirement, so they didn't even have the thought process that a lot of people will have, which is, I'll put in the super, but then I can't touch it. This couple were very close to being able to touch it. They didn't need the money outside of super, so quick win. But if they didn't come to us and they didn't do it within the right time frame of selling the property, they wouldn't have had the ability to put that money into super, and they wouldn't have had the ability to get that tax credit. So it's extremely important. I'm really glad you brought it up. That if you're thinking about it, speak to your accountant and get all of the information that you need before you just decide to sell it, because it's all too hard.
Property, like we say, is the hero, and you've got to think about. Yes, you're going to be paying that agent cost. Yes, there can be a capital gain. This is where a financial planner comes in with a mortgage broker and an accountant to know where you stand on your numbers to make the best decision forward. Because, again, even at 6% compounding growth, that property in 15 years' time will make you $900 to $1 million on the upside. So you're giving up that gain as well. So you want to surely know your numbers and where you're at now and what you can do regardless, so you can make a strong decision forward. And that's where I see people get really emotive because, again, we can't go on our annual holiday or do we have to take one of the kids out of private school, whatever the case may be. People get very emotive with that sort of stuff personally. So have a clear plan of attack, get the right education, the right professionals around you so you can make really good decisions. And I would encourage property managers out there to encourage their landlords to do the same, because they're just with agents I've spoken to, they're saying they're getting a lot of calls from landlords just really concerned. So even put them onto the right professionals to protect your rent roll, but also to genuinely support investors and landlords moving forward in their decision making.
Yeah, well said, Marty. And probably the thing I'd probably lastly bring up before we round out this episode, pretty sure, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's something like 800 800,000 fixed loan contracts coming to an end at the end of this year. So we're talking people that locked in at 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3%. They've currently got low repayments on their home loans, but there's 800,000 of them coming to an end at the end of this year where they're going to jump up to 5, 6, 7%, whatever those loans are going to look like, and they're going to be some of those ones that were the example of some positive cash flow into a massive negative cash flow. So there, again, don't bury your head in the sand and wait for that to happen to you. We've said it time and time again, is to get prepared and get organized. But then with everything, there's an opportunity. If you are a first home buyer or somebody looking for your first investment property and you're thinking, oh, it's too hard, I can't get into the market, there's not enough good stock out there at the moment. If you're not in the mindset right now of getting prepared, you need to start thinking that this is an opportunity for you, that where somebody else may need to sell because they can't afford it, it may be your chance and your opportunity to get into the game and be ready to go. So that for me is probably one of the biggest opportunities, knowing that there could be some really great stock coming on the market. And fortunately, quite a few friends and family of mine and cases are, right now getting into property. They've finally secured their first properties after waiting years through COVID of being outpriced and knocked out of the game. And it's exciting. It's actually kind of got Case and I feeling really motivated to go, you know what, let's pull back, save as much money as we can, and also be in a position to maybe strike if the opportunity for the right property comes our way.
Get into the market where it's affordable to you. You don't want to have sleepless nights. The rates may still rise and it will turn again the other way, but get into the market where it's affordable. And I think that's a really important thing. And we're seeing, even on the refinancing, we're doing record activity, supporting as many people as we can during this time. And it's amazing. Like, some people have been on good rates for 3 years, rate savers, and their revert rate once they come off is a lot higher. Like, we've seen 7, 7.5, 7.9. So we're saving people, up to 1 to 1.5%, just because people have sort of been passive in good times and haven't reviewed their mortgage. So the discounts we're getting is significant, and that might just be a benefit to you in the next 12 months. So don't be passive, take control, get the right professionals, and ensure that you're positioning yourself in the best way possible forward.
Well said, Marty. Absolutely well said. Well, that has been another episode of The Numbers Game. We thank you for listening once again. Love your support of always coming back and catching up with the latest Numbers Game episode. If you've loved what you've heard from myself, Nick and Marty, once again, like, share, follow, subscribe, all of the stuff you can do, or even jump onto LinkedIn or Instagram where you can find our profiles and interact with us, guys. We do respond. We do love talking to our listeners and, providing some advice where we can. Until next time, though.
Game over.